You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Data Center Therapy Live. Data Center Therapy is a podcast from IVOXY Consulting. We talk all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. I'm your host, Matt Yeti. Alongside me is my co-host, Mr. Matt Cozzolino.
Hello, hello.
This episode kicks off a very special mini-series on what has us all hot and bothered here at IVOXY Consulting, our new on-demand lab. The engineers are in. Scooch over. There's plenty of room on the DCT couch. So, like I said, we have a new mini-series starting today, and we're live. So it's really special. It's great to see everybody here at VMworld Redux. Our second session of this, and we kind of flipped the script, May did, and we're doing things in a little different order. We bookended the last Redux event at the end, and now we're kicking it off. So today we're going to talk about what we've been, kind of undertaking, already in production, in motion, is our new on-demand lab at IVOXY. Just so you all know, and thank you for being here and listening with us, and we really hope you enjoy this. We would love to take some Q&A if we have some time by the end of this. So if you've got questions, topics you want to talk about, we got to fill time, really, is the pressure on us, right? So we've got to fill time, we've been told. No, happy to throw the questions in the chat, and we will hopefully be able to get to them by the end. So, Mr. Cozzolino, how are you?
I'm great. I'm actually looking forward to this. I think the live bit's pretty cool, and doing it with the Redux is pretty neat.
It's good to talk about something other than I don't know if anything else is going on in the world lately or the United States, but it's good to move off that topic and talk about fun stuff. Actually, that makes me very happy. So I know for me the lab has been the thing that's kind of like poked that nerd knob and like, ooh, this is a thing that I can really get in and jump on and enjoy. So I feel like you've got the same kind of thing, right? Historically, IVOXY's always had a lab, right? We've had a colo space, and over time, as all of our customers know, the equipment doesn't just continue to stay up with the new features or requirements, and things stop working, hard drives break. If you're not under support, you're not getting hard drives, etc. So we would not only run our classes out of the lab historically, but we would also do demonstrations, run things, but demoing things and tinkering with things, and hey, a lab that students can use, you really run the risk of blurring that line and causing supportability issues, uptime issues.
We have this whole now production environment that we got to maintain, right?
Right. And also historically, we've always done hosted email at IVOXY because the answer is, okay, what happens when Exchange breaks?
Right.
We don't have an ops staff that can maintain uptime. So the lab kind of goes directly in the face of that model. So something that is reliable and requires very little hands-on from day to day, sometimes is tough to achieve, right? It's kind of opposite ends of that spectrum. So we basically now have a new lab, but one of my favorite topics to talk about is cloud, right? Whether that is good or bad, I love the debate.
It's the topic. It's the hot button, yeah.
Got thrown out there pretty early, right? As cloud is can we use cloud for what we want to achieve? What's your point of view on that? Let's forget that we made the decision.
Well, right. So I mean, there was a bunch of things that we identified as stuff we need to questions to ask before we actually pull the trigger and say let's build this thing. And that was one of them. I do believe I was on a little bit of the positive side of maybe let's do that. Specifically because if we take and go all the way to that scripting design and define everything as software, then here, let me run this script against AWS, and now our lab stood up, right?
It's funny because I think even though the dashboards of the public cloud providers are nice, easy to add services, I think it truly is, and it's funny. I laugh because Microsoft Windows is becoming Microsoft command line. Like here's this GUI. Forget the Unix days and all of this and drag and drop. Now it's swinging back the other way to not graphical. It really is infrastructure as code and scripting that makes the cloud go,
or
Yeah.
that's the preferred way of deployment because
Yep.
it's about elasticity, it's about repeatability, it's not about
Yes, exactly.
one time drag and drop. But I mean, on my side, I looked at that, but we also have our own chunks of Azure AWS that we play with that IVOXY is generous enough to give us that leeway to say, hey, you have to be able to learn and test these things that we're talking about. So
you
go
need
ahead.
To have somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, but I forgot to leave or turn a VM off one month, and here's $150 at IVOXY.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to do that to them either. And that experience was like, okay, since we don't have an ops staff or somebody to say, I'm the puppet master, everybody kind of has to, not worried about malice, but everybody has to be on top of that. And the wider scope that that the lab will take care of, the more opportunity there is for that one VM or a multiple of that one VM.
3, 4, 5 of them, yeah. Oops.
And that was a real concern. So we ended up going hosted in a mix of new equipment or old stuff dragged around until we can justify potentially refreshing it with
there's been some reuse of hardware, some
mostly
new purchases. Yeah, mostly new. I thought it was really cool. Like we went so far as to do a mission statement. What are we trying to accomplish with the lab? How do we want to support that? What's important for us? How are we going to handle stuff breaking? Because you know what? I buy a switch off of eBay, but is that appropriate for us as a company to do? Right? That kind of a process. How are we going to handle that when something breaks? Right?
Well, it's also practicing what we preach too.
Yes.
If I like let's say I have a Cisco switch, and hey, do I need SmartNet on it? Well, ultimately, I feel like I'm a pretty smart guy. Matt, you're a pretty smart guy. Mac Netkin, our consultant manager and networking savant, super smart guy. But ultimately, when it comes down, let's say it's a bug in the code, I have to be able to call the manufacturer because ultimately it can potentially go beyond anything that I have control over.
Yeah.
And at home, you might be okay throwing the old Linksys router if you need to, but yeah, something like that where it just uptime is important, or
it makes a difference. It matters, right? Yeah. What happens if something critical fails in the middle of a 4-day class, right? Then how do we solve that?
Yeah. And building in the redundancy to get there first of all, and not having a single point of failure is very important too. But also that times 2 on your cost, for every piece, right?
I thought it was kind of neat. We got to do a lot of the nerd stuff that we talk about, and it'd be great if my customers would do X. So like redundant power strips that are switched, so we can go log in and turn them on and off, right? That kind of stuff we had an opportunity to do that. So we were able to, and it's super exciting to have that set of gear now.
So we have 2 power legs, AB.
We have AB power. We what else did we decide to do? We decided
that would have been one that I would have fought against. Not fought, but I would have said is less critical. But hey, like that's
it kind of goes into
obviously better
CapEx, OpEx, right? The cost of buying a power supply once or 2 power supplies once is really all it's all I can.
I'm looking at it from a do you need 2 separate power services at the data center?
Yeah. I mean that's a balance, right? There's trade-off.
That's a balance.
It takes one trip of a breaker, and bam, there goes everything.
That's true. So let's talk about the 2 scenarios of use. You've got a demo testing ground. I demoed vRealize login site for a customer earlier this week, out of our lab, or maybe it was last week. It could have been last year at this point. The way it feels, who knows?
3 days ago might as well be months, right? Yeah.
Right. So I demoed that. That was super easy because, surprise, surprise, even better, we're using it.
Right.
So it's not like I gotta, something like a log or a monitoring tool like VROPS.
We've got actual data coming into it, right?
Can be a very boring demo out of the box because installing it's really easy. Now what do I want to look at? And so we're using Log Insight to capture almost everything in our lab, and it's kind of a nice dumping ground for everything that it takes syslog inputs and chews on it. I was able to demo that very easily. That was great. certainly a low risk demo. I'm not installing anything new, not changing network configurations, but
and we
yeah.
can use it too, right? We'll
Yeah.
use it day to day through operationally standing up a class, and we're developing a. I think one of the interesting ones is developing the workflow for onboarding a new class, and we'll talk with
Yep.
I think Shane on our next episode about that
Yes.
process for him for his class, because he was the first one. And now we've got another one coming up, and we're going through that same onboard the class, load up all the
Yep.
VMs, deploy the network infrastructure underneath it to support it. So that's also a thing that we've had the opportunity to go to or work.
And I would say definitely where more of the focus has been up to this point has been on the student lab deployment. We haven't done much. I don't know about you, Matt, but I don't think we've done yet for example, the Horizon 8 demo that Ryan's going to be doing. We're not running that out of our lab just yet, but the idea is we want Ryan to be able to spin up a new Horizon 8 environment with impunity and no risk really at stepping on anything that goes on in our production class. As far as I'm concerned, a demo to a customer for Horizon 8 is as production as a student's class, though, too. They both need to work without stepping on each other.
Right. So that's, I think, the process we went through. We ended up with, this is how we're going to address it, and how can we build this environment to be able to support you need to run a class, and you have this self-contained pod or set of pods to run this class out of, or you want to run this demo of this new infrastructure, and that parallels that march towards software-defined data center self-provisioning stuff. Here's my portal to, I need an environment. Let me go click this and give it 10 minutes to spin up, and here's my environment, right?
You know what's funny about that, though, too, when you think about cloud versus on-prem? I think with the way we use it and consume it from a class standpoint, cloud probably would have made more sense. From a purely financial standpoint, if I'm able to, and I'll get to another part that makes me go back the other way, but from a purely financial standpoint, the idea of a student pod being spun up for a class temporarily and torn down sounds very cloudy. Like, yeah, I could really take advantage of that elastic nature and not have a lot of compute running when I don't need it.
I need one of these things to exist to develop in, and then for a week I need 20 of them, and then I only need right? Yeah.
That's the elastic nature of cloud that takes advantage. It's great, but given our demo ability, and therefore having an infrastructure running, generating data all the time, goes on the other side of things. Secondarily, I think part of a cloud negative from my experience, or my opinion especially, is lack of flexibility. And I'm sure there'd be plenty of people who jump on me and say, no, actually, it can be more flexible. I don't know if it can be more flexible than owning your own gear, but
more flexible in the sense that when we say, hey, we want to run 2 classes, we want to run 3 classes, we want to spin up 30, 40, 50 pods, now we're getting to a point where we have to source that equipment to be able to support that. Versus you throw it at AWS and it's just done, right?
Well, that's true too, but even especially if you're talking VMware, though, it's not quite as elastic either. VMware Cloud on AWS and things like that. There's still that outlay up front to get the info. It's not like, oh, I'm going to add 50 VMs. Let's just add 50 VMs and I can scale. It's unfortunately not quite there.
So
yet, right?
I see a question in here about pods, and I think we should kind of address that a little bit. We have the term what we're using for pod is a set of compute that holds all of the VMs and the desktop that you log into as a student. So your student environment is a pod and 4 VMs, right? It's got some networking, and it's duplicated X number of times per student. How we do deployment for like DR, which is what the question I see is, cloud
From
or
Jerry.
colo for
Thank
a
you, by the way.
secondary DR, right? Yeah. That's a different thing than what we're trying to do here, and has a different set of requirements that are wrapped around it. You end up talking about how do you get users in there, how do you get your data synced between the 2 sites, right? That's a different set of requirements as well.
Yeah. So, okay, how production are we making this? What happens when something goes down? Do I get to call you? Get you on record right now.
I mean, you can call me. That doesn't mean I'm going to do anything. That doesn't mean I'm going to answer.
We haven't defined those SLAs around
Nope.
Cosmos availability.
Yeah.
Not fair. Well, so how did we size this to start? I mean, I think the idea was get the ball rolling, give us adequate room to do what we want. Right. I mean, give us room to do what we want to.
Mm-hmm.
And then the idea is we get enough classes, enough students, and then the revenue to match that, where we can say, okay, we can justify an increase to accommodate that.
I know I did a lot of the number crunching for the sizing of the hosts, which is fairly boring. At the end of the day, it's how much memory, how much CPU can we cram into a box and make it cost effective. When I think we'll talk some more with Shane about that, but we used his environment. He had spent some time building some VMs at home and came up with a sizing of how much memory, how much CPU we needed for that, and we did times 20 and then plus 10% for some overhead.
Yep.
And then the question was, the thing that we did with that was we said, what's our growth path, right? So we can do this here with this footprint, and this is the hardware kit we want to buy. And then what happens when we need more? How do we grow? What's our path? What's the next steps to be able to scale that up? And we built some of those answers in from the get-go so that we know what's easy to do immediately and what's easy to do step 2, step 3. Right.
It kind of surprised me, given that in the environments that I would always used to run when I was in ops, it seems like memory is always your limiting factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your vCPU is just, unless you're running a ton of SQL or highly transactional stuff, it's not very heavy. And I never really did any VDI stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy to see the CPU meters going on our 4 hosts, like creeping up above 50, 60%.
And that was
60,
just the VDI deploy, wasn't it?
Well, it was both, I think. Well, one, you've got nested ESX,
mm-hmm.
right? So you potentially have very heavy VMs doing many heavy things ahead of time, during that time. And then you've got the VDI desktops, which it's funny to think about, but your average VDI desktop is busier CPU-wise than your average server. But it's true.
Yeah.
And that's really what got us around to virtualization in the first place back in the early 2000s. It was, you've got 100
all
servers
of resources. Yeah.
Each one of them is using 3% of the physical resources underneath. Let's just do this and layer them on and take advantage of it. Okay, great. And now, everybody's YouTube desktop is hammering away at their CPU. And
right.
Yeah. So
it was a little take some CPU. Yeah.
Little pucker moment at deployment when we were doing our scale testing to 20
mm-hmm.
or 30 pods.
That was fun actually. When we did we do? 20 pods?
I think we ended up on 20. We were aiming for 16 students, mm-hmm. so we stretched to 20, so we have a handful of throwaways in case we need to just forget it, start over,
mm-hmm.
and go. I mean, really, where we ran into problems were
getting enough
API.
people. Oh yeah,
and
yes,
API
yes,
too.
that one, yeah. The
so Terraform will take all it can get, right?
Yes. We run this. We had to do the scale back parallelisms. We can only run 2 tasks at a time to keep from running into the 150 API calls a second or something.
Great thing about Terraform, because it's state-based, means it's not a script. It's not a procedural mm-hmm. thing where if I run it, it does all these things, and if it fails on 2 of them, oops, it's going to just duplicate everything I just did if I run it again. It's like, no, this is the state that I want. If it fails at anything, you just run it again, and it makes up the difference. That's great. But without that parallelism, depending on the operation, it was running maybe 2, 3, 4 times to really get the mm-hmm. entire thing built, and
and it just sits there and hammers away. It'll call a task, deploy this VM, clone this VM, and then are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? And just
right.
And that doesn't do anything beneficial for the.
And I think we were running into some issues along the way too at the relative immaturity of some of the API implementations, mm-hmm. right? You like NSXT, which I'm so glad I got to learn NSX based on our own deployment of NSXT, and I'm still obviously learning a ton, because you could whiteboard NSXT and all of this, and I'll pick up 10% of what I really need to know practically.
Mm-hmm.
But having to do it and deal with it is great. But I mean, they just dropped 3.1, right? We're on 3.0,
mm-hmm.
even though that's probably a security by obscurity faux pas there. I shouldn't be sharing what version, so you're not attacking us out there.
Sure.
Black hats. But their APIs would leave behind gremlins pulling stuff out, and because
some
Terraform is this depends on this, depends on this, depends on this. You can't delete a network port group if there's still a VM associated with it, right? For example, programmatically. So those things threw us some challenges, but I mean, as far as I know, we worked around them.
Yeah, lots of opportunity to learn. There's definitely a difference between I can deploy this and look at what I can do, and now that I have this tool and I have this problem to solve, running through that, going through that process and learning the ins and outs. And if I do this, then I run into these problems. If I do that, I run into those problems. So there's definitely a learning curve to that.
I found it really interesting, not to dive too deep into only NSXT, but it strikes me as odd how VMware's finally come around and they've landed on this set of products. Now they call that NSXT and new or whatever, redeveloped. But it harkens back to me to DV switches plus vShield Edge. You remember that?
Kind of,
the vShield?
Yeah.
That they were doing software-defined networking a long time ago. Just not really sure on how to coalesce around it.
Right.
And at this point, is this going to supplant DV switch?
I don't see that replacing a DV switch per se. So in my mind, the constructs are very interchangeable. The NSXT NVDS switch that you deploy is very analogous to a standard vSwitch. The layering the stuff onto a DV switch just gives you a little bit of a presentation layer difference, right? You can deploy your DV switch and you can attach these NSX bits to it. It's really comes down to, like, when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's where does the management for this component happen? It happens in NSX, or it happens in vCenter, or it happens on the host itself, right? That kind of a thing.
I still treat the standard vSwitch as I'm Linus with my security blanket when it comes to I mean, with the NSXT, you have to let go of it because it's being ripped from your hands. You have to.
Yeah. I mean, so I kind of...
Well, you can still handle back-end storage on a standard vSwitch and all that.
Right,
but anything client-based, or like what we're talking about, our student pods, that's all programmatic through NSXT.
Right, and that's kind of where that trade-off is to be able to scale that we either go all the way here and do it, or we spend 45 minutes point and click.
Ooh.
Right.
Ooh.
Just to get a handful of network port groups deployed.
Well, on the other side of NSXT, speaking of APIs, is Horizon, where Ryan would tell us Horizon 8 vastly improved with their API structure. I had to do a little bit of hacky workaround to leverage the API using PowerShell for building the class now. But until I learned the, I think it was remove HV pool, Horizon View pool, I was doing, every time we'd spin up 20 classes, I'd have to go into the GUI and go disable, delete, and it was, and then I found that command. I'm like, yep, great, wonderful, much easier. So what we can do a complete build out of Shane's class, which was the vSphere 6.7 Advanced. 20 pods would be done, inside 20 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, I don't think it was even that long.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got a pure underneath doing the storage, and cloning off of that solid state was just crazy fast.
Yep. And I think the teardown even took longer. But again, yes. I would put that up against the whole NSXT API and dependencies on waiting for all the VMs to shut down. And we had rules that were basically having certain VMs boot, depending on the other one being up already, because DNS and time were a thing and a challenge.
Yep, we ran into some issues with time, NTP, and
But I mean, I feel confident right now, not having run that class in 6 weeks since the last one, that I could go in and run it and it's going to work.
Yeah.
Where go do that thing that you do twice a year, and every year you go do it manually, and you're worried what's changed in between that I haven't thought about. Where that is, and I've been harping on this, I was not being sold automation for the automation purpose.
Right.
I was like, well, what if I have a static environment, not a lab? What if I have 80 VMs and I spin up one every month or so? I don't need to automate that. It's the consistency. The standards, like where if everything else stays the same, or you control it, right?
You don't get that. You try to remove that fat finger mess up.
Well, your FNG, your FNU guy can go in here or girl, and you don't have to worry about the fat finger or them doing it a different way. You just this is the Terraform state file that you need to go with.
Mm-hmm.
The vars file. Yeah. Well, so this is, I mean, when we talk about the lab, and you say mission statement, we don't necessarily, when we're talking to a customer, talk about mission statements, but it does drive our philosophy with how we approach the customer's needs. And I always like to break it down as instead of here's this fancy solution, let's see how it can fit in.
Right.
I just do this and I say, I listen, and where's the pain? Just tell me the pain, and then we'll see what could be the solution or the paths to a solution, and if that requires this product or that product, or one fits better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we tried to follow that dog food, so to speak,
right,
with our lab too.
That's exactly I think how we did it. I heard a great comment from Mac actually a while ago. The reasons for upgrades were either I have this problem I need to solve, and this new thing solves it. I have this problem that this old thing is causing, so I need to move away from that. Or, I guess that's really the two of them. Or I guess I need the new feature. I need that new feature to solve this other thing. So, that's what you said is exactly how I approach talking to customers. Like, what are we trying to solve? Yeah, I could sell you this thing, but do you need it? Do you have a need for this? What's your problem, right?
Well, you know what's funny too is that, and in a pre-sale cycle with a customer, when we're talking about requirements and what the pain points are, we are typically as consultants talking with typically the engineers on the customer side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking with the CFO, maybe not even the IT managers. I mean, sometimes, and hopefully we are, but not always. It depends on the structure of the company. But that engineer then has to go back and justify or fight for dollars or whatever on their side. It's not fun, that part of it. And we had to do that internally too.
Mm-hmm.
We have purse strings. We have people who above our grade that make the decisions on where we're going to spend money, if we're going to spend money, and what we spend it on. And that was interesting because I know we jumped through, how important was backup? Like, how critical is backup? Do we need a DR site for the lab? Like, going really down the road and deep and
asking all of those questions.
Yeah. So we have, our partners have been very generous to us in helping us build it up. Like you mentioned, Pure Storage being our back end, poor us, right? That was an amazing get because storage performance is just not something we have to worry about. Rubrik, we're using Rubrik for backing up our lab, which is just incredible. Although I did find in 5.2 they don't support NSXT.
Right. So the other pieces were on a bit of the bleeding edge here with a couple of things. You ran into that with Rubrik and the backups. I know we did. We had some fun, interesting things, which we'll get into a little bit more with the virtualized ESX hosts and networking and what we're presenting to those. Yeah.
Well, I remember the old trick was just promiscuous mode, right? That was the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did that change?
Well, I mean, that was just one of the things we had to address.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly. Well, and then it was we were dealing with from the NSXT standpoint, you had being able to trunk that port was a challenge for you, right? That wasn't as straightforward as it could have been.
And so that I think speaks a lot to the to where we are in the life cycle of these products, because the option was there, the value was there, the button was there to click if I go into the manager to solve this issue, but I can't do it in Terraform because it's not built into Terraform yet, right?
Yep. Oh, side note, I want to follow that up. The Rubrik, they're at 5.2.x right now. Is their current GA? Their 5.3 release, which I think is on track for the end of the year, if not very early Q1, does support NSXT, but it's weird when you think about backup. The nice thing is you can be bleeding edge on backup because
should be able to. Yeah.
Well. The way we were treating it, at least, is we were backing up student VMs, which are in NSXT. We've got plenty of VMs that aren't in NSXT. Most of the infrastructure, the core, is not. It's outside of NSXT, right? So restoring one of those VMs, restoring our domain controller, no problem. When you think about it, outside of corruption and a backup, which is basically, in my opinion, a the worst thing that could happen for failure from a backup software, right? Outside of that, it's like, okay, well, really, what's the risk? Because as long as we have the data, then I don't really care about all the other stuff.
Something else out.
So we were protecting all of the student. This is before we knew that NSXT and Rubric 5.2 didn't play along.
Mm-hmm.
We were protecting all student pod VMs every 15 minutes. Sounds like a great idea. Like, oh, I just blew up this. Let's roll you back.
Because when do you get that as an option in a class, right?
Right.
I think
it's
click
cool.
something wrong and totally borked it. Here, let me just roll you back to 15 minutes
Right.
ago. Right? Yeah.
Right. It was a neat thought, and so we did it. Let's roll you back. We ran into it. Promptly tipped over vCenter. It literally crashes vCenter, which is like, why is all this weird stuff happening? Yeah. So it backed it up fine. Just couldn't restore it. Couldn't live mount it. It was not happy. So the great part about it is Rubric is just eminently reachable. Their support's wonderful, and obviously at IVOXY we have great relationships behind the scenes, partnership wise. Not to say like you have to be a partner to get that support, though. That's the nice thing too. Is I encourage any of my customers, open a ticket, and if you're not getting joy, let me know, and I can kind of shake a tree in the background if I need to. And I love to do that if it comes down to it. Happy to do that. I made a living on screaming at people over the phone, actually.
Pay attention to this one, yeah.
But they're like, oh, let me check, and they're like, oh, it's coming in 5.3, and if I wanted, I could push for early access to 5.3
and get that beta code.
Right now, we have some time between classes, and so in the interim, what we did, just ran a script or set up a PowerShell script to walk through, look for the pertinent folder names in vCenter. That's what I'm using for a filter, which just basically isolates all of the student VMs and takes a VMware snapshot every 15 minutes. And then it rolls off the 5th snapshot, or 8th or 9th snapshot. I'm keeping like 2 hours worth of snapshots at 15-minute intervals. That way, that chain doesn't get out there too far or too long. And then when you're done, you just basically stop the script, or the script doesn't matter when you tear all the VMs down underneath.
It's got nothing to clone or nothing to snapshot at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been great. And that usually that's the pod VMs. That's not the Horizon desktop, right? Because the Horizon desktop is completely disposable at that point. We could always just rebuild it.
It's interesting. We've got a couple of different ways to address a couple of different problems. How do we address your student workstation desktop to log into? How do we provide remote support to students? That was one of the issues, one of the things we came up.
And very challenging in a virtual setting. Outside of our lab completely. Forget the lab at that point. Doing a virtual class.
I can't walk over to your desk and look
no
over
shoulder
your
surfing.
Shoulder. Yeah.
That was, I would think, and we'll have Shane on next week. I can't wait I'm going to tell him, you better bring it, no holds barred, man. I want to hear everything, pain and good. Yep. But that, I imagine, will be one of his top complaints. What can you do, right? But I think we adapted really well.
Mm-hmm. I know. One of the design pieces we were looking at was wanting to present everyone the exact same environment, and we'll get into kind of how we did that a little bit in the future, but not having to say, hey, your whatever steps process that you're walking through for this portion of the lab, do this, here's your string you need to plug in, but this block right in the center, replace that with your student number X because you're on pod, right? Not having to worry about any of that because everyone has the exact same environment. That was one of the ones we wanted to make sure we had.
Yes.
Not have to log in and then log in to this jump box that's in this thing, so you can, right, trying to get around some of those issues.
I still hear the term breakout room, though, and I kind of involuntarily twitch. Yeah, I mean, May's probably laughing right now, but she was the maestro behind the scenes for Shane, myself, you, because that's the thing.
Like a producer, right?
Well, yeah, and well, exactly, and the straw that stirs the drink. I like to put it that way. But when it comes to an in-person class, and traditionally what IVOXY has done, Alec was our first instructor, 14 years ago. And did it for many years. He could run a room by himself. Our engineers, our consultants can run a room by themselves physically, because you can get from here to here to here. Obviously, could always use a second body if available, but with the virtual class, it's almost required to have 2, and maybe the idea of 3, which is a challenge for us too because we're not a huge company. We don't have a ton of idle engines running. Everybody's got stuff going on, and everyone here at Redux knows that I think multitasking, at least for me, is a myth.
Yeah, we can't.
I really think it's a false concept that, or at least productive multitasking. I can do one thing well, or I can do two things terribly. There, yeah, I can multitask.
Right. There's that.
Yeah,
I mean, it depends on what level of integration you have in the task, right? So if it's I gotta wash some dishes and stir this pot of spaghetti that I'm cooking, I mean, we can do that. But if it's I've got to write this script and then help you with this other thing over here that takes a good chunk of brain power, that's like, they're shifting gears.
You know me,
so...
I am very, I don't know if tunnel vision is the word, but I am very deep and focused into what I'm in. And over the last 2 years at IVOXY, I've shifted to a blended pre-sales, post-sales, that's what we call it internally, to mostly pre-sales cycles. I still do some implementations and all that, and I think it's a good thing for everybody to never get out of that completely, because then you're just proclaiming from on high how these projects are going to go when you might not have any reality into how it actually has been going out there in the field. So it's always a blend, but 8-9 hours with a customer on site focused on tasks A through Z, can do, focus, no problem. Going from 1 call to 2 call to 3 call to 4 call, all on completely different topics, no break in between, completely different subjects, different customer, that is a hard switch for me.
Yeah, it is.
So
even me.
I mean, that's not multitasking, but there is that overlap. There's no windshield time anymore, at least lately. You know, there's no drives between meetings.
Kind of nice, yeah.
You say kind of nice, but now have 3 calls back to back on different topics, and you're like,
you start at 11 o'clock, and then suddenly it's 4 in the afternoon, and you're like, what the hell happened to the day?
You're praying for a call to end early so you can take a breather.
Can I go pee, please? Come on.
So yeah. You know, it'll hopefully turn back to in-person meetings very soon here. I'm looking forward to it. Braving the cold, whatever, I'll take it. So yeah, so that's nice, I mean, that's a kind of a good start, I think, to, you know, the problems that we face, the challenges, and the goals we wanted to achieve by building out our on-demand lab. So I think we're going to do like 6 of these episodes.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple more. And
over the next 2 months, I think we're going to try to keep our cadence, or maybe even increase a little bit. So maybe
so we can have a little bit
by
of
the end of 2020, we might have all of these in the can for all I know.
Yeah. And then
we can take this year and put it in the can too.
I think the goal is like we're going to spend one of the episodes and talk about NSX and specifically get into the weeds about what are we doing with that and how are we solving these problems and what kind of stuff did we run into, right? And then talk about...
Well, I know that we're also thinking about doing some video too. So there might be some screen share accompaniment to these podcasts. If we, you know, obviously you can still listen to the audio, but we might be adding that in there too. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler alert, my marketing team.
I won't say anything.
Right,
I won't tell anyone. Yeah. That's okay.
Here's what's really cool. All of this lab stuff that we're talking about, we have multiple new virtual classes utilizing this lab coming up very soon. And our next one up is being taught by our very own Keith Emanuel, networking savant. He's actually a CCIE. Look at that. Hands-on network automation with Ansible.
Yeah.
So, Matt, you're a big Ansible proponent. You got me whipped up in it a little bit. But from what I gather, there's an awful lot of momentum on the networking side with Ansible.
All those all that Mac work. Move out change, right? Yeah.
Yes. So Keith is going to be teaching a class. So stay tuned. Registration's opening up very soon. So if you are already a member or a subscriber to the podcast, you are listening to these, and there's your heads up right there. Keep an eye on the podcast. Outside of that, follow us on our social channels. So I believe it's like Twitter and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best one. But follow us on our social channels, and that will, as soon as the registration opens, news will drop there first, right? We're not a very spammy company, thankfully, so I don't think, I know emails will be going out, but we try not to be heavy with that. So socially, you can consume without getting bombarded, so go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll drop when registration opens. Should be very soon. So I'm looking forward to that announcement, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So outside of that, if you're listening for the first time and you haven't, subscribed, go ahead and, subscribe on your favorite platform.
Smash that
list
like
them all,
button.
but we're there. Smash that like, hit that subscribe.
Yeah, there you go.
You're getting ready
that's
for
what the
YouTube,
cool kids
I
are
think
saying,
it sounds
right?
like. It sounds like you're getting ready for the YouTube broadcast. I guess with that, we're going to kick it back to our MC May at the Data Center Therapy Live. It's Matt Yeti on behalf of Mr. Matt Cozzolino. And we should go back to our VMworld Redux. Yeah?
We return you to your regularly scheduled program.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks,
Enjoy
everyone.
the day.